Good morning, respected Emeritus Chairperson, sir, all senior faculties, colleagues, and dear students. So, we are going to cover a very important yet least diagnosed and least understood problem in our field, in the field of infertility. But before that, I would like to give a brief introduction of our department. Our department was established in MGH at MGH in 2012 and starts functioning in full capacity since 2016. We started MCH Reproductive Medicine and Surgery super specialty courses in 2020 and we got 2 seats out of 13 all over India. So it's a very upcoming super specialty branch. We are lucky enough that in our team includes our Emeritus Chairperson as our guide and mentor, and our Chairperson sir as our strength and support. 2 of our sub-centers, or I can say our parental center, the Jaipur Fertility Center at Bunny Park, is being headed by Dr. Alka Gehlot, our professor, and at Sekarmarg it is being headed by Dr. Sangeeta Sharma, our associate professor. We are providing all the ART facilities under one roof, right from the basics like in vitro fertilization, ICSI, blastocyst culture, laser hatching, surgical sperm retrieval procedures in the azoospermic patients, freezing of gametes and the embryos, cryopreservation, the third-party reproduction that includes the donor oocytes and the donor sperm facilities. We are also providing the advanced laparoscopic surgeries in infertility supported by the Department of Cases, Dr. Nahata sir, Dr. Fareen Chishti madam. We are also providing the genetic testing and counseling with the fetal medicine facility supported by the Department of Genetics, Dr. Rekha Gupta. And we also get support from the Department of Obs and Gynae, Usha madam, Swati madam, Jaya madam, who are always ready to guide us in our difficult and complicated cases. Also the Department of Neonatology, Madhu madam, Dr. Saurabh, Dr. Arjun. They are all a very important part of our work, and because they are the who take care of our premature IVF babies and some other complications of neonates in IVF cases. Also our embryologist, Dr. Ravikant Soni, Arjunji and Purva, they are also a very important part of our work. So I can say it's a teamwork that involves many departments to finally achieving our goal of giving a healthy baby to our patients. The evolving facilities in our department is the facility of fertility preservation in the cancer patients before the start of chemo and radiotherapy, both the oocytes, gametes and the embryo cryopreservation. Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis in patients who have history of some genetic disorders or advanced age or history of some recurrent failures, and also the embryoscope, which is a continuous monitoring process to get a best embryo. Besides MCH, the other courses running in our department are the BSc, MSc and PhD in the embryology, 6-month certificate course in the basic and advanced ART as well as the clinical embryology. Our teaching pattern is based on the integrated and interdisciplinary learning. So the Department of Urology, Endocrinology, Cases, Medical Genetics, Radiology, Psychology, they are all very important in our teaching and training of our students. And it reflects in the academic achievement of our residents. So far we have 3 batches and our first batch passed out in January end only this year. And out of 6 students, Dr. Sana and Dr. Simran, they got first prize in poster. Dr. Aparajita and Parvati got third prize in the paper presentation in our national and state conferences. Dr. Parvati also awarded first prize in the quiz at our national conference in 2023 and got a sponsored trip to our international conference, that is ASHRAE in Denmark in 2023. Dr. Aparajita contributed a chapter along with the faculty in a reputed book of hysteroscopy. Our faculty also got awards. Dr. Alka Gehlot and me, the ISAR Achievers Award in 2023, and Dr. Alka Gehlot also received Jeevan Rakshak Award in 2024. Dr. Sangeeta Sharma was honored to get the IFS Achiever Award in our national conference at Gurgaon by the Indian Fertility Society in 2023. Our faculty also participates as faculty in different national conferences. Dr. Sangeeta Sharma also contributed many chapters in many reputed infertility books. Our upcoming project is related with the role of stem cells in the infertility, especially the thin endometrium and premature ovarian insufficiency, in collaboration with the Department of Cases, Nahata sir. And there are many ongoing research projects in our department right now. So now I will call Dr. Aparajita to start with the case.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, respected teachers and colleagues. I'm Dr. Aparajita Pankaj, MCH resident from Department of Reproductive Medicine and Surgery. I'll be talking about a 46-year-old postmenopausal lady wanting to conceive. My patient, Mrs. JD, 46 years of age, a homemaker, married for 25 years, belonging to lower socioeconomic status according to the modified Kuppuswamy scale, and educated up to secondary school, presented with the chief complaint of inability to conceive since the last 25 years. History of presenting illness. There was inability to conceive since 25 years despite taking several treatments from outside. She also complained of reduced menstrual flow since marriage. She used to get bleeding for 2 days in a regular 28-30 day cycle, and it was not associated with any dysmenorrhea, and there was cessation of menses since the last 2 years. So what can be the differential diagnosis at this stage regarding our patient? Can anyone answer? Yes, so the probable differential diagnosis related to our patient with a prolonged duration of infertility of 25 years, it can be classified into female factor, which includes tubal factor like infective and non-infective causes. Infective causes includes most commonly genital tuberculosis in our country and other sexually transmitted diseases. Non-infective causes include endometriosis and pelvic adhesions. There can be uterine causes, which include synecdoche or intrauterine adhesions and chronic endometritis, and congenital anomalies, the Mullerian anomalies, which include unicornuate or hypoplastic uterus. Next category can be the male factor, which includes severe oligoactinoteratozoospermia and azoospermia, or also sexual dysfunction. Next is systemic causes, which include hypothyroidism, hyperprolactinemia, and uncontrolled diabetes. There can be combined factor, that is both the female factor and male factor, and unexplained infertility. So moving on with the history, there was no history of loss of appetite, weight loss, or prolonged fever, no history of excessive hair growth or acne. There was no history of excessive hair growth or acne, no history of excessive pain before and after menstruation or painful intercourse or painful defecation, no history of abnormal vaginal discharge with pain lower abdomen, no history of excessive weight gain, dry, coarse skin, heat or cold intolerance or constipation, no history of headache, visual defects, any discharge from breast, no history of use of any drugs, or no cohabitation difficulty. Menstrual history, the patient has been amenorrheic since the last 2 years. However, the past cycles were regular, and before marriage her cycles, she used to get bleeding for 3 to 4 days in a regular 30-day cycle, and after marriage the flow had reduced to 2 days in a regular 28-30-day cycle, and it was not associated with any dysmenorrhea. Obstetric history, she's a nulli gravida. Past history, there was no significant medical history. She underwent a diagnostic laparoscopy around 17 years ago, and no other major surgical history. Family history, nothing significant. Personal history and sexual history, nothing significant. Regarding the husband, he is 52 years of age, married for 25 years, works in a dairy, educated up to secondary school. He was apparently asymptomatic and chews tobacco, and semen analysis was within normal limits in all previous records. So from a differential diagnosis, what all can be ruled out at this stage? Can anyone answer? Now moving on to the past treatment history which the couple underwent outside. They started consulting doctors after 6 months of marriage for conception, and they took multiple cycles of ovulation induction intermittently with letrozole and clomiphene at different centers, wherein ovulation was documented and the husband's semen analysis was within normal limits. After taking ovulation induction treatment for about 5 to 6 years, she was advised for a hysterosalpingography, and it was suggestive of a bilateral coronal block. This is how a normal HSG looks. The uterus appears normal. These are the tubes. both the tubes, and there is free spill of dye in the peritoneal cavity. And this HSG image is suggestive of a bilateral corneal block. Point to note that these are not the images from the patient's records, as these records were not available. These are just for references. This is how an HSG procedure is done. It is a routine OPD procedure to check for the patency of both the fallopian tubes. The patient is placed in lithotomy position, and we visualize the cervix using a speculum, and an HSG catheter or a cannula is placed through the cervix. A radiopaque dye is inserted, and then the X-ray is taken. So since HSG is a screening test, patient was advised for a diagnostic laparoscopy in view of the HSG findings. This was done around 18 years ago, and the findings were the tubes were thickened, convoluted, dilated with fimbrial agglutination, and tubercles were also seen. And during the surgery, a chromoperturbation test was performed, which is a test to check for the patency of the fallopian tubes, which is done intraoperatively, and there was no spill of dye in the peritoneal cavity, which again suggested bilateral corneal block. And this is how a laparoscopic procedure is done. This is a surgical procedure done under general anesthesia. Patient is placed in lithotomy position, and for infertility patients we do hysteroscopy and laparoscopy together. First we do the hysteroscopy, we visualize the cervix and introduce the hysteroscope and visualize the uterine cavity. And then we put the laparoscope through the abdomen via a small incision of 10 millimeters, mostly placed supraumbilically. And this is a normal pelvic anatomy. We can see the uterus is normal, both the tubes appear normal, and both the ovaries look normal. And this is diseased tubes and uterus. No sir, these are reference pictures. So at this point, the other differentials which we can rule out are combined factor, unexplained, congenital Mullerian anomalies, non-infective tubal factor, the sexually transmitted diseases, and we are left with infected, that is genital tuberculosis, and synecdoche and chronic endometritis from the uterine causes. So the provisional diagnosis at that time, in view of the menstrual history of hypomenorrhea and laparoscopic findings, were genital tuberculosis. The patient was put on anti-tubercular treatment for 1 year, following which she underwent 2 IVF cycles at an outside center at an interval of 1 year at the age of around 31-32 years. Both the cycles were unsuccessful, and she did not take any further treatment for the next 15 years.
Good morning, respected professors, all the seniors and dear colleagues. Today I will summarize the female genital TB. Female genital TB is responsible for the 10 to 26% cause of female infertility in India. The most common presentations are infertility, menstrual irregularity, and pelvic and lower abdominal pain. In this case, patient had complaints of infertility and menstrual abnormality. Most common age group is 20 to 30. When there is initiation of symptoms, patient's age was 21 in this case. And most common sites affected are the fallopian tube, 90 to 95%, followed by endometrium, ovary and cervix. In this case, the patient's fallopian tube was affected in form of bilateral corneal block. It carries very poor outcome in terms of fertility due to delayed treatment and post-TB sequelae. Conception rate after female genital TB is only 19.2% and live birth rate is 7.2%. Female genital TB carries 19% cases of all the extrapulmonary TB. It is difficult to confirm microbiologically because of its paucibacillary nature. The extrapulmonary TB is paucibacillary in nature, and it requires invasive procedure for the sample collection. Now, approach to the female genital TB. When the female patient presents with complaint of infertility, abnormal uterine bleeding, abdominal pelvic pain, fever, weight loss, and tubo-ovarian mass on examination, we should suspect the female genital TB and should do the endometrial sampling for AFB smear, AFB culture, gene expert, histopathology and USG pelvis. If any of the microbiological samples are positive, then it is the confirmed case of female genital TB and ATT should be started. But if there is clinical suspicion and microbiological tests are negative, which happens in most of the cases, so we can further proceed by laparoscopy, hysteroscopy and USG. In laparoscopy and hysteroscopy, if there is definitive findings like tubercles, caseations, beaded tubes, then we should start ATT as per the ICMR and NTEP recommendation. And if USG is suggestive of tubo-ovarian mass, which can be confirmed by MRI and CCT pelvis, then also we should start ATT. So if any of the microbiological samples are positive, it is the definite case of definite female genital TB. And if ATT is started based on laparoscopy, hysteroscopy and USG finding, it is probable female genital TB. In this case, patient had complaint of infertility, menstrual abnormality with laparoscopy finding of dilated tubes and fimbrial agglutination and hysterosalpingography suggestive of bilateral corneal block. So it is the case of probable female genital TB, and patient took ATT in 2006 for 1 year. Now various diagnostic modalities. The definitive tests are histopathology, which is having highest sensitivity of 8 to 64% and which is done on the late luteal phase before menstruation, followed by CBNAT, AFB culture and AFB microscopy. AFB microscopy is having least sensitivity. AFB culture can also be done on the menstrual blood on day 2. So because of its possibacillary nature, it is difficult to confirm microbiologically. So other important tests which we need to further evaluate the probable female genital TB are laparoscopy and hysteroscopy visualization, USG pelvis and CCT MRI of pelvis. Now the treatment part. There is the patient took treatment as per the older RNTCP regimen, but as per the current regimen, the ethambutol is added in the intensive and continuation phase, and treatment has been changed from thrice weekly to daily. So in the current recommendation, the treatment should be given for 6 months with intensive phase of 2 months including isoniazid, rifampicin, pyrazinamide and ethambutol, followed by continuation phase of 4 months.
Now after 15 years, the patient came to Mahatma Gandhi Hospital Department of Reproductive Medicine and Surgery in May 2022 at the age of 46 years for evaluation and further management. Workup of the patient at our hospital. In the general physical examination, the patient was found to be overweight as per the WHO criteria of BMI criteria, and rest of the general physical examination was unremarkable. Systemic examination was unremarkable. In the local examination, external genitalia appeared normal. Per speculum examination, cervix appeared healthy, and on per vaginum examination, uterus was anteverted, bulky, globular, freely mobile, and both the fornices were free. Now moving on to the investigations. The routine investigations were within normal limits, and since our patient was an elderly patient, 46 years old, postmenopausal, and wanted to conceive, we did more investigations to make sure that she is in optimum condition for future pregnancy. These tests were within normal limit. However, vitamin D levels were lower and supplementation was given. The hormonal status was suggestive of postmenopausal status.
I'm sorry, 46 is not elderly.
We did a transvaginal sonography. We do transvaginal sonography of our patients, infertility patients ourselves, under the guidance of Dr. Manisha ma'am. This is the uterus, the body of the uterus, which appears bulky with asymmetrical myometrial thickening. This is the posterior wall, which appears more thickened as compared to the anterior wall. The endometrium was slightly thin, around 3.2 mm, with reduced vascularity on color Doppler. And we can see a focal adenomyoma measuring 4 by 4 centimeters on the posterior uterine wall, which was slightly indenting the endometrium. Also, we can see a 5 by 4 centimeter subserosal fibroid in the anterior uterine wall, and both the ovaries were small. These are the different types of fibroids and adenomyosis. Adenomyosis can be focal, diffuse, and or an adenomyoma. Now to summarize, we have a 46-year-old postmenopausal female with primary infertility of prolonged duration of 25 years with no comorbidities, with tubal factor infertility, that is bilateral cornual block, with a history of genital tuberculosis and completed treatment for the same, with 2 failed IVF attempts, and sonography suggestive of adenomyosis of uterus with posterior wall adenomyoma and subserosal fibroid according to the International Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology grade 5 fibroid. So our final diagnosis was a 46-year-old postmenopausal lady with primary infertility with bilateral cornual block due to genital tuberculosis. Now what can be the further plan of management in such a patient who is wanting to conceive? So our plan was to assess the endometrium after giving her hormone replacement therapy with estrogen and progesterone. We give tablet estradiol 2 mg in a step-up protocol for 28 days along with tablet progesterone 10 mg daily for the last 10 days. And if that endometrial assessment would be found to be satisfactory, we will proceed with IVF with donor oocyte. And if it is not found to be satisfactory, we would do a diagnostic hysteroscopy followed by IVF with donor oocyte. So moving on with endometrial assessment, we gave the patient hormone replacement therapy for 3 cycles with tablet estradiol 2 mg in a step-up protocol for 28 days and tablet progesterone 10 mg daily for the last 10 days. On this HRT also, patient had reduced flow, and the mid-cycle endometrial assessment in the third cycle was found to be suboptimum. The endometrial thickness was around 6.8 mm, homogeneous with average vascularity. Hence, we decided to proceed with hysteroscopy. This is a reference image regarding the endometrial zones. Zone 1, the red arrow is the zone 1, which is 2 mm area surrounding the hyperechoic outer layer of the endometrium. The blue arrow is the zone 2, which is the hyperechoic outer layer of the endometrium. This brown arrow is zone 3, which is hypoechoic inner layer of the endometrium, and green arrow is zone 4, the endometrial cavity.
This is hysteroscopic ultrasound.
This is ultrasound, transvaginal ultrasound. Now, we did the hysteroscopy in July 2022, and the cavity appeared normal with uniform distension. Endometrium looked pale with periosteal fibrosis. This is suggestive of periosteal fibrosis and pinpoint ostia. And there was no obvious bulge at the site of the adenomyoma, and we gave fundal mix in order to enhance the endometrial receptivity and vascularity. The endometrium was sent for histopathological examination, which was suggestive of proliferative endometrium, and AFB culture and CVNAT, which were negative. Post-hysteroscopy, we did an endometrial assessment after giving 1 cycle of HRT, and the endometrium was found to be satisfactory with 7.1 mm thickness and improved vascularity up to zone 3. So now, regarding the adenomyoma, we had 2 options, either to go for a medical therapy or a surgical therapy. The medical therapy is in form of gonadotropin-releasing hormone agonist, which is a depot injection which is given monthly. So the therapy is easy and the patient is also compliant. However, the reduction of the size of the adenomyoma varies from patient to patient, and also there is high recurrence rate after stopping. And regarding the surgical option, it requires technical expertise, especially for a laparoscopic excision, and there might be surgical complications which include hemorrhage during the surgery or incomplete resection. And also in the future, during the pregnancy, there is a risk of scar dehiscence. So the patient and the family were counseled regarding the options, and the patient did not want to undergo major surgery at this point. So we decided to go ahead with the medical management of adenomyoma to regress the size of the adenomyoma. We put the patient on GnRH agonist depot injections of leuprolide 3.75 mg intramuscularly monthly for 2 months. And in the meantime, we were searching for the donor oocyte, and when the oocytes were available from the oocyte bank, intracytoplasmic sperm injection was done with husband's sperms. Before the implementation of the ART Act, we used to get frozen oocytes from the bank. So we got 6 oocytes, and out of which 5 embryos were formed after inseminating them with the husband's sperms, and 4 were of grade A quality, and they were cryopreserved. So the gametes or the embryos are cryopreserved in liquid nitrogen at a temperature of minus 196 degrees Celsius, and they can be stored up to a maximum of 10 years. Now, as per the latest ART Act, which was passed in 2021 and implemented from January 2023, an oocyte donor is provided by the ART banks, and these banks are registered under this ART Act. The age of the donor oocyte should be between 23 years and 35 years, and donor is to be screened for various infectious diseases and should also undergo a psychological evaluation. Donor shall donate oocytes only once in her lifetime, and not more than 7 oocytes should be retrieved, and the unused oocytes are to be cryopreserved for use in the same recipient. This is how an ICSI procedure is done inside our laboratory. The sperm is mobile, so in order to immobilize it, we hit on its tail and aspirate in the injecting needle. And this is the oocyte, which is being stabilized with the stabilizing pipette, and the aspirated sperm will be injected into this oocyte. So in ICSI, 1 oocyte is being inseminated with 1 sperm. So for this patient, we had 6 oocytes. So each of the oocyte was separately inseminated with single sperms.
This is our video.
Now, after achieving satisfactory endometrium, giving her 2 depot injections and formation of the embryo, we started with the frozen embryo transfer cycle. This was a JEEP FET regimen, that is gonadotropin releasing hormone depot injection followed by exogenous estrogen and progesterone therapy for frozen embryo transfer. This was done in December 2022, and the endometrial assessment on the day of embryo transfer was satisfactory. 2 of the frozen embryos were thawed and transferred, and after 2 weeks when we did the serum beta HCG levels, the result was negative. So now on analyzing the negative outcome, the things which came to our mind were a poor endometrial receptivity in view of previous history of genital tuberculosis, also the presence of the large adenomyoma of the posterior uterine wall, which was slightly indenting the endometrium with minimal regression on depo-GnRH therapy. Advanced age of the patient, embryo-related factors and technique-related factors. Here in our case, the embryo transfer was done under strict asepsis following all the standard guidelines, and the embryo which we had frozen were good quality grade A embryos. The age is, yes, it's a non-modifiable entity. So the things which we had to keep in mind were a poor endometrial receptivity, maybe because of the previous history of genital tuberculosis, or the presence of the large adenomyoma on the posterior uterine wall. So we did an MRI pelvis to evaluate this adenomyoma. I invite Dr. Neha Sharma from Department of Radiodiagnosis to tell us about the MRI findings.
As we can see a T2 sagittal view of normal uterus. The white line or hyperintense line denotes the endometrium. The black line here denotes the junctional zone, and the hyperintense area here denotes the uterine myometrium. In our case, we can see a T2 weighted hypointense lesion with lobulated margins and reaching up to the serosal surface of the uterus. It is seen in the aspect of lower uterine body causing bulge over the overlying uterus. This is a typical fibroid of FIGO classification type 5. Here we can see another lesion which is poorly marginated and altered signal intensity, and we can see that in T2 axial scan it shows hyperintense foci, bright foci, which denotes tiny cystic areas within the lesion, and in T1 weighted axial view we can see few white dots which denotes the hemorrhagic areas. These findings are suggestive of adenomyoma. Here we can see that the fibroid is showing no indentation on the endometrium. The endomyojunction is well defined, and whereas here we can see that the adenomyoma is displacing the endometrium inferiorly. Here we can see the normal reproductive age group ovaries. Both the ovaries can show white hyperintense follicles, and in our case here we can see the left ovary which shows no sizable follicles within them because our patient was postmenopausal. The MRI pelvis findings were hypointense lesion with lobulated margins along the lower uterine body suggestive of a fibroid, another poorly marginated altered signal intensity lesion along the left posterolateral aspect of fundus with tiny cystic and hemorrhagic areas that was inseparable from the adjacent junctional zone, suggestive of an adenomyoma.
So the patient was counseled for the laparoscopic adenomyomectomy and myomectomy in view of previous IVF failures, compromised endometrial receptivity, and no significant reduction in the size of adenomyoma after giving depot injections. I call Dr. Ankita Chaudhary.
Good morning, teachers and colleagues. Now I would like to proceed with laparoscopic part of the surgery. Laparoscopy findings were a 5 into 4 centimeter fibroid was found on anterior wall of uterus, which was removed, and baseball sutures were applied over that raw part. And at the posterior wall, we found an adenomyoma which was removed and defect sutured by triple flap technique. This technique was given by Osada, and we try not to enter the endometrial cavity, and we should at least 1 centimeter margin should be preserved over endometrium, and 1 centimeter margin should be preserved below the serosa. In this image, the first image, the myoma is being removed and baseball sutures were applied. In second image, triple flap was raised, and in third image, triple flap was sutured over one another to provide support to the uterus so that scar dehiscence won't happen in pregnancy. Challenges of adenomyomectomy. The extent of removal and technical difficulties are there because adenomyosis, the tissue of the adenomyoma is fibrotic and inflamed, and method of uteroplasty, which is triple flap technique, successful preservation of the endometrium for fertility, and intra-op complication risk, that is heavy bleeding. Risk of scar dehiscence during pregnancy is higher in adenomyomectomy than in myomectomy, which is 5 to 7 times. Now,
Good morning, everyone. The Department of Pathology received two containers, one A labeled as leiomyoma, in which we received multiple soft tissue pieces collectively measuring 6 into 5 into 3 centimeter. The cut surface was grey-white, it was firm in consistency, and it showed a whirling pattern. The container B, which was labeled as posterior wall adenomyoma, consisted of several grey-white to grey-brown soft tissue fragments collectively measuring 3.5 into 3 into 1.8 centimeters, and one of the larger fragments contained tiny cystic spaces. The microscopic examination of container A showed intersecting fascicles of smooth muscle spindle cells, and on higher power we can see that these spindle cells have moderate amount of eosinophilic cytoplasm and a bland cigar-shaped nuclei. There is no mitotic activity, there is no cytological atypia, there is no geographical necrosis. So this was confirmed to be a case of leiomyoma. The microscopic examination of container B showed, on low power view, we can see that there are benign endometrial glands and stroma arranged in nested pattern intersected by smooth muscle proliferation. Some of these glands are cystically dilated with hemorrhagic area, as we can see in the scanner view image. And on higher power, we can see that there is no cytological atypia, there are no other evidences of malignancy, and correlating with the radiological diagnosis of a of a localized, well-defined bordered lesion, we confirmed it to be a case of adenomyoma. I'd like to give the case back to Dr. Aparajita.
So the patient was in regular follow-up post the laparoscopic surgery and was put on low-dose HRT for 3 months. Endometrial assessment was done after 3 months, which was found to be satisfactory. And here we can see the posterior wall, the adenomyomectomy scar. And also depot injections were given for 2 months for suppression of to regress the residual adenomyosis. Now the second frozen embryo transfer cycle was undertaken in October 2023 with the same JEEP FET regimen with tablet estradiol 2 mg in a step-up protocol, and along with that folic acid supplementation and aspirin 75 mg were also started. And on day 13th of the starting estradiol, we did an endometrial assessment. The thickness was 7.2 mm trilaminar, that is the triple layer pattern, with average vascularity up to zone 3. And from now, progesterone injections were started 100 milligrams daily. And after the third day, we did the frozen embryo transfer on 16th November. 2 of the remaining embryos were thawed and transferred, and folic acid, aspirin, estradiol, and progesterone supplementation were continued. After 14 days of the transfer, the serum beta HCG report was positive. And the same management was continued, and routine antenatal investigations were within normal limit at this point. A pregnancy confirmation scan was done at 7.2 weeks from the date of embryo transfer. It was a dichorionic diamniotic twin pregnancy, and a 3 by 3 centimeter heterogeneous area in the posterior myometrium, which was suggestive of the adenomyomectomy scar, was seen. So there were some complications or anticipated complications related to the fetus and the mother in view of the posterior wall adenomyomectomy, the twin pregnancy on a scarred uterus, and advanced maternal age. So the maternal complications which came to our mind could be preterm delivery or preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, uterine scar dehiscence or uterine rupture, placenta accreta spectrum, gestational diabetes or hypertensive disorder of pregnancy. And the fetal complications include prematurity, fetal growth restriction, fetal death, and later cerebral palsy, learning difficulty, and developmental delay. So we counseled the patient and the family regarding these complications, and they were given the option to undergo either a fetal reduction, that is reduce the pregnancy from twin to singleton, or to continue with the twin pregnancy. Patient decided to undergo fetal reduction. Now I invite Dr. Sarika Yadav to talk about fetal reduction.
Good morning, respected seniors and colleagues. I am Dr. Sarika Yadav. I am working in the fetal medicine department. So the patient was called for a routine nuchal translucency nasal bone, that is the NT-NB scan. She came at 11 weeks 6 days. NT-NB scan is a routine first trimester screening advised to all pregnant females. The purpose of the scan is to screen for chromosomal aneuploidy, structural abnormalities, and also preeclampsia screening. As we can see in this mid-sagittal profile view of the fetus, the hyperechoic area behind the neck is the nuchal translucency, and the hyperechoic area is the nasal bone. So the scan was normal for both the fetuses at this gestation. So since it was a twin pregnancy reduced to singleton, the team wanted to be very sure that the surviving fetus is a healthy one. So we decided to call the patient after 2 weeks to ensure a healthy fetal growth and to rule out any other structural abnormalities, which was done at 13 weeks 4 days. After the scan, a multifetal pregnancy reduction was done and the smaller fetus was reduced. It is a day care procedure. It means reduction of one or more healthy fetuses. In this, under ultrasound guidance, after giving local anesthesia, a 22-gauge spinal needle is inserted into the amniotic cavity to the fetal heart, and 0.5 to 2 ml of 15% potassium chloride is injected and asystole is confirmed. Absence of cardiac activity is reconfirmed after 2 hours and the patient was advised to go home after 2 hours. Minimal activities were advised for 1 week and prophylactic antibiotics were given for 5 days. The risk of the procedures are miscarriage less than 24 weeks, which is 1.4%, preterm pre-labor rupture of membrane around 5%. Very rarely, if not done under proper supervision, it can lead to maternal spillage, which can be fatal for the mother also. So this is the latest follow-up of the patient at 15 weeks 2 days. We can see the healthy fetus on the left side of the screen with the cardiac activity and the reduced fetus, which is small and crumpled. I request Dr. Aprajita to continue the case.
So the current status of the patient, we are related to inform that the patient is 15 weeks and 6 days pregnant as of today. And by the grace of God, her antenatal course has been uneventful. Her clinical, general physical examination, obstetrical examination is all within normal limits and corresponding to the period of gestation. I would like to say that this has been a long journey of nearly 2 years of constant efforts, patience, perseverance and hope, both for us as her doctors as well as for the patient and her family. However, this is still not the end, as we are all aware that there can be a risk of miscarriage, preterm delivery, development of gestational diabetes, hypertensive disorder of pregnancy, intrauterine growth restriction and uterine rupture. So the patient has to be kept under strict antenatal surveillance. So the take-home message is that we should have a very high degree of suspicion for genital tuberculosis in women presenting with prolonged infertility and hypomenorrhea, recurrent pregnancy losses and recurrent implantation failure. Early diagnosis and treatment is the key for battling infertility in women. On behalf of the Department of Reproductive Medicine and Surgery, I thank the management for providing an excellent academic platform and I also thank the CCR Review Committee for their comprehensive, all-inclusive, in-depth review of the presentation and the collaborating departments for their contribution, and finally the patient and the family for their confidence and assurance in us. I conclude this session with an excerpt from a poem by Mr. Harivansh Rai Bachchan.
असफलता एक चुनौती है, इसे स्वीकार करो। असफलता एक चुनौती है, इसे स्वीकार करो। क्या कमी रह गई देखो और सुधार करो। जब तक न सफल हो नींद चैन को त्यागो तुम। जब तक न सफल हो नींद चैन को त्यागो तुम। संघर्ष का मैदान छोड़कर मत भागो तुम। कुछ किए बिना ही जय जयकार नहीं होती, कोशिश करने वालों की